All right. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Okay, here we are in session number 3. So Bismillah wa la ilaha illallah ilaha alamina. The name of God, there's no other God but God, the deity of the world. Before we get cracking into the text, I want to address a few points from the last session, and then the last point will basically segue into the reading for the second half of the chapter of Adam that we have assigned for today. So the first point is, someone asked a very important question about the difference between the approach to the question of the intelligibles between Sohrawardi and Ibn Arabi. And this is a very, very important question because it essentially establishes two completely different approaches to the question of ontology itself. So Sohrawardi's approach is as a Platonic realist. So the intelligibles or the Platonic idea, the ideal forms, he holds them as objective ontological realities, albeit on a higher plane of existence than the sensory and the material. So the way he lays out his metaphysics and his emanationist cosmology, you have an order of longitudinal and latitudinal lights, which begin and initiate from the light of lights, the Godhead. And as these emanations descend down from the light of lights, they generate their worlds and their barriers, and then their levels below themselves. So what he assigns as these order of the longitudinal and latitudinal lights establish the reality of the intelligibles. So he calls them by things such as the ummahat, the mothers, and the lord of the species, the arbab and no, etc. But unlike Plato and just general Platonism, Sohrawardi does not hold these idei, these Platonic forms, to be static realities. He holds them to be very animate things. So the intelligibles, or these lights, these order of the longitudinal and latitudinal lights, are an angelology. So they emerge from the light of lights and they establish the realm of the various angels of Sohrawardi's cosmology. But yet they are real as far as Sohrawardi is concerned. And so with Sohrawardi, what we have essentially, although he never articulated it specifically within this term, is the primacy of essence or quiddity, esalat al-mahiyya al-ain. So the primacy of quiddity or essence is the basis of the ontology of Sohrawardi. And where these intelligibles have real ontological form and reality, etc., albeit beyond the plane of sensory perception and materiality. With Ibn Arabi, it's a little bit more complicated. With Ibn Arabi, these Platonic, Ibn Arabi, first of all, was a Platonic idealist. And from the greater perspective, the intelligibles, the immutable archetypal essences or entities, as he terms it, al-ayan thabita, are not objective ontological realities in the same way that Sohrawardi holds them, right? They do not possess true essential existence, and he hammers this beginning from the first chapter of Adam. So they do not hold wujuna aini. They do not have true essential existence. This is because Ibn Arabi is fundamentally what we call in philosophy an occasionalist. So meaning God is the only true cause for everything. What appear to be causes in the natural world are only occasions for God to act, right? And hold no independent ontological reality of their own. Such natural events are merely correlated, not causally connected, right? And simultaneously, this is because Ibn Arabi is basically what we would call a Neoplatonizing atomist, because we know this for a fact that he drew a lot of influence from the theological school of the Ash'arites, the school of Kalam that was founded by Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari in the 9th, 10th century of the Common Being. But where this leads Ibn Arabi's greater ontology is at the opposite pole of what Suhrawardi holds. And although, just like Suhrawardi, he never coined this particular term, with Ibn Arabi, we're dealing with the primacy of being, isalat al-wujud. So this is the difference between Suhrawardi and Ibn Arabi on the question of the intelligibles. And it's a very thorny question that plagues Islamic philosophy after both Suhrawardi and Ibn Arabi for centuries, even up to today, where there are still debates between those who hold to the primacy of essence or quiddity, isalat al-mahiyya, versus those who hold to the primacy of being, isalat al-wujud, like Ibn Arabi and his followers, and the school of Mullah Sadra, etc. The second point that I wanted to raise, that I wanted to last week, but we didn't get to it, is that, and this is from the translation of Abrahamov, who translates this particular sentence extremely clearly, where Ibn Arabi asserts, no one knows about the real, al-Haq, except that which is given to him by one's own essence. And this is a very, 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 very important point, and it completely negates any accusations of pantheism, because right there, implicitly, there is no question of substance being broached by Ibn Arabi. And I find this particular passage especially being echoed later on in the Bayan of all places. And I had this back and forth with a gentleman this last week, because who had listened to the audio recording, and he said, well, how can you say that Ibn Arabi and the Bayan mesh when the notion of the Godhead in the Bayan is that it is a very transcendent deity? But so is it in Ibn Arabi. But what the Bayan very fundamentally agrees with Ibn Arabi from the very get-go of the Persian Bayan is the following, and I quote, and this is for the benefit of this gentleman who had the back and forth with me over the week. I'll quote the passage in the Persian first and then my English translation of it, where the Bab says, right at the beginning of the Persian Bayan, خلق نفرموده آیه عرفان خود را در هیچ شی الا به عجز کل شی از عرفان او، در پرانتز یعنی عرفان به وجود مطلق حضرت احدیه او، بعد و تجلی نفرموده به شی الا به نفس او. In translation, it, the Godhead, has not created the sign of its gnosis, its irfan, within anything other than by the incapability of all things to attain its complete gnosis, meaning, in parentheses, meaning gnosis of the absolute reality, the essence, the wujud al-mutlaq, or in other words, the presence of the exclusive oneness, the ahadiyya, close parentheses, nor has itself disclosed its theophany, its tajalli upon anything, except in that thing's essence, which is saying exactly the same thing that Ibn Arabi is saying here in the very first chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, for no one knows about the real al-Haq except that which is given to him by one's own essence. And this is a very fundamental premise of the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi that then branches out into a lot of ways that he talks about the nature of the real between al-Khaliq wa makhluq, the creator and the created. And this should be borne in mind, especially from those detractors who believe that there's a chasm between the understanding of the Bayan towards metaphysics and that of Ibn Arabi. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, and I've been doing this for 3 decades now, I read the Bayan as an Akbarian, and I read Ibn Arabi as a Bayani. So, and there is a lot of that in both of them, and there's a lot of fundamental points of disagreement. It is up to future scholars, in my opinion, to kind of referee what the emphasis on these questions is. But as far as I'm concerned, the presence of Ibn Arabi and his form of thinking is very much present in the Bab himself. Now, someone else asked me a question about, that they're getting confused about the kind of the maratib, the hierarchy of being that we're finding in this chapter of Adam, and just overall in the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi. And what I did a while ago is I basically reduced this maratib and the hierarchy of being in Ibn Arabi to a formula. And it's a very kind of a poetic formula in Arabic. And the way I did it, I read the Arabic and then my translation of my own formula. I have phrased it as Alhamdulillahi alladhi huwa kana kanzan makhfiyan wa lam yazal wa la yazal min ahadiyatihi aqama al-asma wa sifat الأماء واحديته وتجلي العالمين بهم من أزليته بالنقطة مشيته ليعرف كل شيء بأنه هو شجرة الحقيقة التي هي لا إله إلا هو وكل شيء هالك إلى نوره. Praise be unto God, who was a hidden treasure and unchanged and unalterable from the situs of his exclusive oneness. Appraise the divine names and the divine attributes upon the hidden cloud of its inclusive unity, and theophanically self-disclosed upon the worlds by them from the situs of its pre-eternity, by the point of its divine will, so that all things may know that it is the tree of reality, who she is no other God but he, and all things perish but its light. Now, the point that I should make here in this form of the tahlil, hiya la ilaha illa huwa, what this is trying to convey in this language is what Ibn Arabi states at the very first paragraph of the chapter of Adam, and that is the nature of the mirror. He says that God projects as the mahal, the mirror for the generation of Adam. Now, anyone who knows Arabic knows that the word for mirror, marat, is also simultaneous to the word for woman. So this is one of those amphibolous points that Ibn Arabi puts in his Fusus al-Hikam that I have spent many years thinking about. And in my own first chapter of the Effulgences of Wisdom, Majali al-Hikam, this is the point I begin and deal with half of the text, is about the nature of this mirror, that in the symbolic language, if when we unpack what Ibn Arabi is talking about in a very cipheric kind of way about the Eve. And there's this famous poem by Ibn Farid, who was much beloved to Ibn Arabi in his school, where Ibn Farid outright says the same thing, that at the dawn of creation, the first thing that Adam beheld was Eve, which is the manifestation of Allah subhanahu to him. And finally, the last point is now going to segue into what we're going to read of the next half of the chapter of Adam. And this has confused a couple of people, and that is what Ibn Arabi is talking about the four modalities of generation. Mr. Austin has translated it in a very general way. Canadagli has translated it in his way, and then we have the translation of Abrahamov, where he just basically leaves the terminology in the original Arabic and then assumes people to understand what he's talking about. So the terms that are issued that are stumping a couple of people are muhdith, ihdath, hadith, and muhdath, right? So the term muhdith, the one bringing into being, this represents God, right? The bringing into being, the ihdath or ahdath, is the imperative, and this is what represents the command, the amr, at the very beginning of the first chapter, and this is the amr of kun, to be. The coming into being, the hadith, can represent the locus, the mahal or the mirror that Ibn Arabi is talking about, and the brought into being, the muhdath, is Adam himself. So once we understand these three forms of causality that are happening here, it is very then easy to try to get our head around the argument that Ibn Arabi is making. Now, it is very interesting that in Arabic, because of the changing of one vowel on the second triliteral root, a fundamental meaning shift happens. So the one bringing into being is God, who is the muhdith, whereas the one brought into being, who is Adam, is muhdath. When we understand this, then we understand what Ibn Arabi is about to tell us about the nature of the cause of things inhering in its effect. And he's using language in the way that the Arabic language is to convey this sort of some would call it a backwards kind of cosmology, because usually in a straightforward logical system of ontology, a cause is a cause and an effect is an effect, whereas what Ibn Arabi is asserting is actually yes and no. Yes, from one perspective, we can say the cause is the cause and the effect is the effect. Nevertheless, the cause inheres in its effect. And so in this next half that we're about to read, this is basically what Ibn Arabi is trying to tell us. And what then is the difference between the cause and what is the difference between the effect in terms of the relation between the two? And how, even when a cause inheres in its effect, how does that change the nature of the cause, or how does that change the nature of the effect? And what Ibn Abri is trying to convey is, even though the effect, the muhdith, or the muhdath, is not God the absolute, nevertheless, the cause inheres in its effect, and this is why the effect is the regent and is the one that reflects both contingency and non-contingency simultaneously. So I will start to read now from where we left off last week. On this point, he says, it is established that the originated, the muhdath, is completely dependent on that which brings it about for its possibility. Its existence is entirely derived from something other than itself, the connection in this case being one of dependence. This is a very important point. It is therefore necessary that which is the support of originated existence should be essentially and necessarily by itself self-sufficient, and independent of any other. This refers to God. This it is that it bestows existence from its own essential being on dependent existence, in this way becoming related to it. This is telling us why the effect inheres in the cause. Furthermore, since the former, because of its essence, requires the later, the dependent, in a certain sense, has in a certain sense necessary being as well. This throws the entire peripatetic and Avicennan causality on its head. So Ibn Arabi is now asserting that the effect is also a necessary cause, not of itself, but by itself. It's the absolute necessary cause, the absolute wajib al-wujud, generates, as it were, through the chain of causality, another necessary being, which is, however, dependent on it for its necessity. Also, since its dependence on that from which it was manifested is implicit in its own essence, it follows that the originated should conform to all the names and attributes of the cause or origin, except that of self-sufficient being, which does not belong to originated existence, since what necessary being it has derives entirely from other than itself, which reiterates the point I just made. Know that if it has been said concerning the manifestation of the originated in the form of the originator be true, it is clear that God draws our attention to what is originated as an aid to knowledge of him, and says in the Quran that we shall show him forth his signs in it. سَنُورِهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي آفَاقِ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ إِنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. We shall show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves, until it become manifest to them that it is the truth. Thus he suggests that knowledge of him is inferred in knowledge of ourselves. Very, very important point. So from the basis of the causality that Ibn Arabi is positing here, he is now glossing and giving us a window into the meaning of man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah. He who knows himself knows his Lord. Whenever we describe any quality to him, we are ourselves representative of that quality, except it be the quality of his self-sufficient being, his qana'ah. Since we know him through ourselves and from ourselves, we attribute it to him all we attribute to ourselves. It is for this reason that the divine revelations come to us through the mouths of the interpreters, meaning the prophets, for he describes himself to us through us. If we witness him, we witness ourselves. And when he sees us, he looks on himself. There is no doubt that we are, as individuals and types, many, and that through representatives of a single reality, we know definitely that there is a factor distinguishing one individual from another, but for which multiplicity would not be implicit in the one. And this is a very, very thorny point that keeps coming back in the commentaries, and each of these commentaries answers this particular point in one particular way. In the same way, even if we describe ourselves as he describes himself, in all possible aspects, there will still remain an inevitable factor of distinction between him and us. This now refutes the claims of pantheism. This factor is our dependence on him for existence, which in our case derives entirely from him because we are originated while he is free of all dependence whatsoever. He's the wujud al-mutlaq, the absolute existence. Thus is he rightly called the one, al-wahid, without beginning, the ancient of days, al-qidam, contradicting all priority in the sense of existence, starting from non-existence. For although he is the first, al-awwal, no temporal priority may be attributed to him. Thus, he's called also the last, al-akhir. Even if he were the first, in the sense of being the first determined existence, he could not be called the last in this sense, since contingent being has no end, being infinite. He's talking about contingent being, not the necessary being of the absolute. He is called the last only in the sense that all reality, though reality be attributed to us, is his. His finality, his akhariya, is essentially implicit in his priority, as his priority essentially is implicit in his finality. Know also that the reality has described himself as being the outer and the inner, manifest and unmanifest, al-zahir wal-batin. He brought the cosmos into being as constituting an unseen realm and a sensory realm, so that we might perceive the inner through our unseen and the outer through our sensory aspect. He has also attributed to himself pleasure and wrath, having created the cosmos as expressing both fear and hope, khawf wal raja, fear of his wrath and hope for his pleasure. He has also described himself as being possessed of beauty and majesty, jamal wal jalal, having created us as combining awe, haiba of his majesty, and intimacy, ons, and so on with all his attributes and names. He has expressed this polarity of qualities in the Quran as being his hands devoted to the creation of the perfect human, who integrates in himself all cosmic realities and their individual manifestations. The cosmos is the sensory realm, both subtle and gross, and the vicegerent is unseen. And this is a very, very, very interesting point. So even though the material world is apparent to us, its vicegerent or its khalifa, which is the Kawn al-Jami, is unseen in its totality to the material world, to the kathra, to the multiplicity. For this reason, the ruler, God, is veiled. So if the vicegerent, if the insan al-kamil in its ultimate reality is veiled, is unseen, God is veiled in relation to even that. Since the reality, al-haq, has described himself as being hidden in veils of darkness and also light. We have a very famous hadith to the point that God is veiled within 70,000 veils of darkness and 70,000 veils of light. And then he glosses, which are the natural forms, and by veils of light, which are the subtle spirits. So God is veiled by natural forms and the subtle spirits, the ultimate, wujud al-mutlaq. The cosmos consists of that which is gross and that which is subtle, and therefore in both aspects, the veil covering its own true self-reality. For the cosmos does not perceive the real to be distinct from its creator and dependent on it. Indeed, it has no part in the divine self-sufficiency of being of the reality, nor will it ever attain to that. In this sense, the reality can never be known by cosmic being in any way, since originate being has no part in that self-sufficiency. God unites the polarity of qualities only in Adam, talking about the cosmic Adam, to confer a distinction on him. Thus he says of Iblis, what prevents you from prostrating to the one who I have created with both my hands? What prevents Iblis is the very fact that humanity, unites in itself the two modes, the originated cosmos and the originating and original reality, which are his two hands, which the commentators also gloss as being the attributes of Jamal, beauty, and Jalal, majesty. As for Lucifer or Iblis, he is only a part of the cosmos and has no share in this synthesis, by virtue of which Adam is the vicegerent. Were he not manifest in the cosmos in the form of him who he represents, he would not be the regent. and where he not to comprise all that is dependent charges required, or were he unable to meet all the requirements, he would not be the regent. In short, the regency or vicegerency is fitting only for the perfect man, who contains both all aspects of the divine and who is the manifestation of the name Allah. And on this point, since it brought Iblis, all of the commentators, particularly beginning with Qaisari and then onwards, who basically repeat this point from Qaisari, say the very same thing, that Iblis actually represents an aspect of Adam himself as a manifestation of the name Odin, the one who misguides. And this is a very, very subtle point that at least normal Islamic theology has a big problem with, because in a sense it is psychologizing the devil as being an inherent aspect of the Insana Kamil itself. And one of the commentaries that I had been reading the week before, that of Baba Ruknuddin Shirazi, a Shirazi Sufi from the 15th century, says that guidance and misguidance through Adam, and those who are misguided by the Iblisian aspect of this name, Muzil, were actually being also simultaneously guided into misguidance through the vehicle of Adam. And I have taken this point in my own Majali al-Hikam, the Effulgence of Wisdom, and expanded on what it means in a sort of allegory. To go on, Ibn Arabi says, his outer form, he composed the cosmic realities and forms, while his inner form, he composed to match his own form. And this is now, Ibn Arabi is glossing what the meaning of خَلَقَ اللَّهُ آدَمَ عَلَى صُورَتِهِ. God created Adam upon his own form. Thus he says in the sacred tradition, I am his hearing and his sight, and not I am his ear and his eye, in order to show the distinction between the two forms, the imperceptible and the perceptible. Likewise, he is implicit in every cosmic being according as the essential reality manifested in that being requires it, providing it is understood that no other being enjoys the synthesis of divine realities possessed by the vicegerent. It is only by virtue of this synthesis that he is superior to all other beings. Were it not that the reality permeates all beings as form in its qualitative form, and were it not for the intelligible realities, no essential determination would be manifest in individual beings. Thus, the dependence of the cosmos on the real for its existence is an essential factor. And then the poem. All is dependent upon another, naught is independent. This is the pure truth. We speak it out plainly. If I mention one, self-sufficient, independent, you will know to whom I refer. All is bound up with all. There is no escaping this bond, so consider carefully what I say. And he goes on, you are now acquainted with the wisdom, the hikmah involved in the corporeal formation of Adam, his outer form, as you have become acquainted with the spiritual formation of Adam, his inner form, namely, that he is the reality, al-haq, as regards the latter, and that he is creature as regards the former. You have also learned to know his rank as the all-synthesizing form by which he merits the divine regency. Adam is that single soul, al-nafs al-wahida, that single spiritual essence from which humankind was created. As he says, O men, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul and created from it its mate, so that from them both there issued forth many men and women. His saying, fear your Lord, or ataqu Allah, means make your outer transient selves a protection for your Lord, that is meaning your inner essential reality. So make your outward form, your conformance to the religious order, as it were, a protection for your inner essential reality, and make your inner reality, the batin, which is your Lord, a protection for your outer selves. It's a very subtle point, but very beautiful that when you sit down and think about what Ibn Arabi is saying, really both gives a practical advice, but also then unpacks the meaning of that famous hadith, Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbahu, whosoever knows themselves knows their Lord. All creation, he says, the amr, involves censure or negation, nafs, and praise or affirmation, itbat. So be his protection as regards censure or negation, and naf as being relative beings, and make him your protection as regards praise as being identified with the Adamic reality, so that you are of those who act properly and are possessed of knowledge. Then he, most high and glorious, caused Adam to look on all he had deposited in him and held it in his hands, active and passive, essential and formal, in the first hand, the cosmos. In the first hand, the cosmos, and in other Adam and in his seed expounding their degrees. When God revealed to me in my innermost center what he had deposited in our great progenitor, I recorded in this book only that which he dictated to me, not all I was given, since no book could contain all of it, nor yet the cosmos as now existing. Of what I witnessed in the spirit, and of that what I recorded in this book as laid down by the prophet, are the following chapters. And then he lays down all 27 chapters from the wisdom of divinity, the word of Adam, to the final one, the wisdom of singularity in the word of Muhammad. And he concludes the chapter by saying, the seal of each wisdom is the word assigned to it. I have restricted myself in what I have written concerning divine manifestations of wisdoms in this book to what is confirmed in that respect in the heavenly book, or the Lawh al-Mahfuz, or the al-Kitab is another term for it. I have transcribed faithfully according as was vouchsafed to me. Even had I wished to add to it, I would not have been able to do so, since the plane from which it came would prevent anything of the kind. God is he who grants success, and he is the sole Lord. This was the first chapter. In conclusion, the chapter of Adam. And now, time for discussion. Questions? Anyone?
Well, I can say here some comments I noted from reading this first chapter of the Fusus.
Yeah.
For example, that last part where it says, even if I wish to increase the context given to me, I would not be able to do so, for God's presence prevents this action. It is God who grants success, and there is no Lord except him. I thought that like very keen to the ayah that from Surah 2, verse 23, that says, if you are truthful, call upon your witnesses other than God, and if you are in doubt concerning which we have sent down to our servant, then bring a chapter like it and call your witnesses besides Allah if you are truthful. So it's kind of the same.
Yeah,
I feel the same
in a very subtle way. Exactly. Ibn Arabi is making a tahaddi, which is the term, produce something of its like, فَآتُوا مِثْلَ هَذَا إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So Ibn Arabi is actually, yes, he's making a tahaddi, which is quite a thing. And this is another reason why it drives a lot of his detractors crazy, because even though he's saying, I'm not a prophet, I am not but he is simultaneously using the terminology of someone who has received wahy, such as inzal and tanzil, without actually using the word wahy. But he also doesn't say that this is just ilham. He's not just claiming I am mulhim, I am just inspired. He's saying that this information is coming directly from the source itself. So even though there is this equivocation beginning from the preamble where he says, I'm just a follower of the interpreter, who in this case is Muhammad, peace be upon him. Yet he is doing almost identically the same sort of challenge, but in a very didactic kind of philosophical way that the Quran itself, the challenge that the Quran actually makes it to its own enemies. If you're capable, produce, something like this. So yeah, that's a very good observation, and that is very much happening in Ibn Arabi. I personally don't have a problem with this because, especially if you have followed a path like Ibn Arabi's, there comes a point, and especially as your practice gains depth and you go, further in, you are at that plane, because, and it is no longer your ego, your anania, that receives information. It is at a higher plane. It's at that level of the ruh, which Ibn Arabi says is also already integrated into the divine reality, because that level of the ruh is the level at which you are one with your ain thabit, with your immutable archetypal form. And so if you were to say, for example, at that point, Ana Muhammad, I am Muhammad, you would be right, because because you're following that exact same path, and because you are united with this immutable archetypal form of yours on the spiritual level that is already connected to the divine reality, it is through that ain, the thabit, that the words of Muhammad speak. Henry Corbin has a beautiful observation about some of these theopathic hadith that are sometimes attributed to the imams, where usually the Hozavis basically dismiss these as inauthentic and made up and etc. And they follow the ilm al-rajal, the science of the men of transmission, to just basically exclude 2/3 of the esoteric and theopathic sounding hadith out of the Shia hadith corpus. And Henry Corbin's answer is beautiful. He says it doesn't matter what the isnad of this is. It is the when such truths are laid bare in a hadith collection, such as some of the stuff that we have in Kulaini or elsewhere, or the ones that are recorded by Hafiz Rajab Bursi, it is actually the mouth of the Imam who is speaking, because the person who has written it or has expounded it at the point of exposition has actually united with the Imam. So that person is now mutakallim, is speaking with the mouth of the Imam itself. So the question is completely irrelevant whether that these rijalis say, like, for example, one example is the Hadith Kumail. The Hozavis, the fuqaha, the muhaddithun amongst them, consider this Hadith Kumail to be inauthentic. This is a hadith that I've been contemplating on for 36 years, and it's basically the basis of my own suluk more than anything. But if you ask a lockjawed seminarian about the authenticity of this hadith, this dialogue between Ali and Kumail, then they would say, it's made up, it doesn't have any authenticity. Sayyid Haydar Amuli in his Jami al-Asrar actually claims that this hadith Kumail was originally contained in the earliest manuscripts of the Nahj al-Balagha. And for some reason it was taken out. So, and for me, the word of Sayyid Haydar Amuli on this specific issue is hujjat, it's proof. If he says it, that is the way it is. And but today, if you go to those who are the opponents of irfan and falsafa, etc., they say this hadith is nonsense. And they also said that they say that about some of the akhbar we have in collections, such as Kulaini, like the ones where the Imams, Ali alayhi salam says, Ana yadullah, Ana babullah, Ana jambullah, I am the hand of God, I am the gate of God, I am the eye of God, etc. They dismiss all of this. So this is the issue, and Korban says it's irrelevant, what these people say, because the place from which these truths are descending are from that plane. And so we can also say this about in a roundabout sort of way, from the plane in which Ibn Arabi received this wisdom. So we should take his word for it. When he's connected that deeply to his own immutable archetypal form in the mind of God, it is revelation that is coming to him, because he's just uniting with it and gleaning that information. So on one plan, if we say that, like a lot of Ibn Arabi's enemies say, this man was delusional, he didn't see the prophet. We have hadith, very explicit hadith, that the shaitan can never take the form of the prophet in a dream. So whoever has a dream of the prophet has, invariably had a roya sadaqa, a veridical dream. And so if Ibn Arabi says he saw the prophet in a dream that gave him the Fusus al-Hikam, then by God, as far as the muhakkikun are concerned, the verifiers on this path, he did behold the prophet, and the prophet gave him his book. But once we elevate this to a higher realm, he beheld the prophet of his being from the station of his Ain Thabita, from the station of his immutable archetypal form in the mind of God. It sounds a little bit complicated, but those who are on a path such as this will understand what I'm talking about. And these things happen, especially the deeper you go into your path, the more these sorts of phenomena happen. It's also, but for some people, it could be very unsettling at times, where they don't adequately then make the distinction between themselves on their level of anania, the level of their ego, in this world, and that which they have beheld in the visions and the dreams, etc. And that's where things start to get difficult. And if they express these shatiyat, these theopathic visions and etc., they can get in a lot of trouble with authorities and exoteric dignitaries, etc., like someone like Hallaj did and similar. But Ibn Arabi, in my opinion, although he's very careful and he is very precise in the things that he's laying down, is making a fundamentally similar claim as to a lot of those who went before him, such as Hallaj or Bastami, etc. He is in many ways saying an al-haq, but the haq that he says that is the ana is not the I, is not the human person of Ibn Arabi, the nafsani, materially located, spatio-temporal Katravi Ibn Arabi. It is that level of Ibn Arabi's spirit that is connected directly to the other world, and which he, as a salik and a muhakkik, as a verifier, has completely united with. I hope this answers that question.
Yeah, thank you, Sheikh.
Sure.
I was also referring to the sense that, for example, also Ibn Arabi thinks about whole of creation like an emanation, divine emanation, and there is no other than God. So La ilaha illallah, right? So there is no other witness to God. So in that sense, so everything at the end, right,
the
comes
phrases
from
that
him,
he
so.
uses throughout all of his writings, especially in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he said, "Laysa fil wujud ma siwa Allah." There is nothing in existence equal to God, right? And this becomes a sort of a refrain. It's almost like Ibn Arabi's tahlil, his form of the La ilaha illallah. Laysa fil wujud ma siwa Allah. So since that is the case, and this is the one of the axiomatic premises of his entire metaphysics, then the charge of pantheism can be thrown out. And also then we begin to understand that theopathic claims of the sort that Hallaj or Bastami make, etc., are never coming from the partial self of any mystic when they're genuinely uttered. I mean, these days, a lot of people make all kinds of claims, as they have throughout history, that are coming from their ego rather from that place. But for someone like Hallaj or Ibn Arabi or Abu Yazid Bastami, etc., where these claims are coming from is not from themselves. So it is a form of tanzil. It is a form of revelation, as a sense, but it has come from effort, and they have had to do a suluk, as it were. They have had to do a wayfaring in order to get to the same place. And this is one of the meanings that we have in tasawwuf and also in irfan generally in the Islamic world, that the urafa, the true urafa, are the inheritors, right? So even though, at least from the perspective of Islamic orthodoxy, the station of prophecy ends with Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nevertheless, the doors of that kind of inspiration are never closed. And there's even a hadith that even the Sunnis accept, where the Prophet, it said that even though the physical station of Nubuwah has ended, nevertheless, God has left a massive portion of the Mubashirat. And the Mubashir is also a title of the Prophet himself. The Prophet is a Mubashir because he begins Bashara, he is the Bashir, etc. And this word can be translated as revelation, as glad tidings, as all kinds of things. And he's asking, what are these Mubashirat? And he says, the Mubashirat are the visions and the inspirations of the true moment, of the true believers. And then it gets very interesting, because when we get into the Imami world, and especially in the akhbar of the Imams, the mu'minun, the believers, are distinguished from the Amma. So the Amma, or the generality of the Muslims, but the mu'minun are a different breed, And Muhammad Amir Ali Moezi in his studies has sometimes glossed this as the difference between the Gnostics or the initiates of the Imams, who are privy to the secrets of the Imam and the secrets of the Quran, etc., which the Imam embodies, and the general commonality or the exotericists who just, only understand the outward form of what the revelation is about. And with someone like Ibn Arabi, this is completely what he's also talking about. This is also one of the reasons that many Shia of a Gnostic and esoteric bent love Ibn Arabi so much, because the way that he even articulates this kind of dichotomy is very much in keeping with the Imami understanding of this dichotomy between the Mu'minun and the Awam and the Amma. Even though with Ibn Arabi, he then says sometimes very weird things, that, maybe will put off a pious Shia. I take a lot of the stuff that he says as a form of taqiyya. Others may disagree, but it is very much present with it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can go. I'm trying to understand, I guess the ontology of the insan kamil. I think the way that you were putting it, it's a kind of spiritual reality, but I mean, throughout this chapter, there's talk of the cosmos, of the sensible cosmos and the unseen cosmos, and there's mention of like the corporeal formation of Adam on page 57. I guess I'm just trying to locate the perfect man in the ontology.
He's everywhere. He
Yeah.
is both material and supersensible at the same time, right? Some of the Bayan is a very interesting text in explaining these things in much more simple terms. For example, it talks about the presence of the perfect human as being the cycle of the sun in its meridian. So the terminology, and it comes directly from Ibn Arabi, that the Bab uses is the Shams al-Haqiqa, right? The sun of reality, shining in the firmament. But then, as the cycle of day and night, he talks about also the period of the Layl al-Layl, the period of the night when the sun is hidden and is no longer present. So when the sun of reality shines, it is talking about the physical manifestation of the perfect man amongst human beings. So in the context of Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam, that means the age where we had the 124,000 prophets present in the world, were the periodic cycles of the appearance of the perfect man in the human body, beginning with Adam. And their disappearance from the eyes of humanity represents the night. Nevertheless, as we understand in the Akhbar of Shiism, the Hujjat, who is the perfect man, the proof, is always present, even invisible. So it isn't the case that the cosmos does not have a proof. So just as I delineated the kind of dialogic of Ibn Arabi last week, the perfect human being as the cosmos in totality is present in one form, right? Although it is invisible in another form. And then when the cycle of revelation occurs, this being embodies itself in the Insan Kamil, whether this be Adam or any of the other prophets all the way to Muhammad, etc. So this is the kind of, the dialectic that is going on. But the perfect man is always present without the perfect human, as he said earlier in the part that we read last week. A total absence of the Insan Kamil means the physical destruction of the material universe. So the Insan Kamil is always present, even though imperceptible to us.
Okay, that makes more sense. What is the relationship between Insan Kamil and the divinity, or that's like the
with the Insan Kamil, we have a visible, invisible thing going through the greater cycle of history. But the Godhead, al-Haq, the truly real, is now veiled even on a station above that. So even though we don't see the Insan al-Kamil in this particular cycle, or maybe we do, but we don't realize it, Allah subhanahu, the truly real, is veiled even beyond that station. And so then the only way to know Allah is through the human being, through the Insan Kamil, which then in other texts of Ibn Arabi, including in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi takes as, whoever has truly at the inner revelation and has really completed the path, has now united with the Insan Kamil on that, terrestrial or that macrocosmic level. And so they themselves then become the mirror, the microcosmic mirror to the Insan Kamil, who is the mirror of God. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I maybe I don't know if I was clear about what I meant by divinity. I was talking about the in the other terms that you use, the inclusive unity.
Yes,
the unity of all of the names.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the Insan Kamil in its spiritual dimension.
The Insan Kamil in spiritual dimension is at the level. In a sense, we could say the levels at which then the names and attributes project, which is at the level of the Wahidiyya. So the first element, okay, the Dhat al-Ghaib, the hidden essence, is the level of the Ahadiyya, right? And the stage at which it begins to manifest, when the hidden treasure desires to be known, is the Wahidiyya, the inclusive unity. And this is the plane at which the names and attributes now begin to project out into the world, which represents the will, right? That Ibn Arabi talks about at the very beginning of the Fusus, that God wills, a locus for the manifestation of the names and attributes. And at this point of the will, right, when the names and attributes project out into the creation of the world, right, this Kawn al-Jami, this universal being, is that becoming, who is the Insan al-Kamil.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a very subtle argument, and you got to take it from this sort of this dialogical form of logic that Ibn Arabi is using, and it drives a lot of rationalists crazy trying to get their head around this sort of thing. Try to picture it in your mind. So okay, we, Ahadiyya, Wahidiyya, right? These are the two, if we take the hadith of the hidden treasure, Kuntu would be the I was, would be the stage of the Ahadiyya. Kenz and Makfiyan would be the stage of the Wahidiyya, who is now beginning to manifest the names and attributes. Right? And fa'ahbabtu, and I desired or loved, would be the stage of the perfect man, of the Insan al-Kamil. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. All the books I've read, I've never heard of. I always thought the perfect man was identical with the inclusive unity. I never heard that distinction made between the inclusive unity
are inclusive, are
the will.
Well, depending on which perspective we're looking at, the Insan al-Kamil contains all of it. Is if we say the Insan Kamil, we are saying Ahadiyya, Wahidiyya, we're saying the Mashiach, the divine will, we're saying the Irada, the divine volition, on and on. But from another perspective, we're looking at it from a temporal progression. These stages also are independent of the Insan Kamil. The Insan Kamil is the mirror that reflects everything, all levels of being, simultaneously.
Okay.
Anybody else? Hassan?
Yes, Saidi, I have several questions. Okay, the first of them, Sheikh Muhyiddin, he's saying that in all the names and the qualities of God, when we understand and realize what is in us, then we realize that the same, but in infinite manner, more perfect, it is in the God, except one thing, that God, he is ghani, self-sufficient,
Right.
and we are contingent on him.
Yeah.
And then he
Iftikhar.
is proceeding.
The word he uses is iftikhar, which it comes from faqr. Faqr means poor, right? So the qani faqir dichotomy is established, which is a very important one. So Allah subhanahu is qani. He is independent. Qani also means rich, right? Whereas we are faqir or iftiqar, as he uses. We are dependent or poor, needy in relation to the qana'a of Allah subhanahu. This is what he's talking about.
No, and continuing from this point, he is further explaining the meaning of al-awwal and al-akhir. Now, my question is, what is the meaning of awwal and akhir when it is referred to God, to Allah Ta'ala, and what is the meaning when it is referred to the created thing as a manifestation of awwal and akhir?
This is a good point, because then it helps us conceive the kind of divine reality that Ibn Arabi is talking about. Exoteric understanding of this awwal wa akhir, right, makes God the first of a series and the last of a series, right? But from the point of view of logic, that creates a logical contradiction. What Ibn Arabi is saying is that God, by virtue of being the already always, right, transcends a series. God is not the first of a series, is beyond the first of a series. And by virtue of being beyond the first of any series, because there's no serialization in God comes first, then this comes next, it doesn't work like that. God is beyond all of that, right? And because of that, he is also the last of the series, because he's outside of serialization or any kind of temporality. It is temporality that understands the concept of numbers, right? Of sequential movement in time, right? But God is beyond that. It's way beyond all of that. So therefore, to say that God is the first is also to say that God is the last, by virtue of being beyond that serialization, that temporal movement of number from one to however infinity. And the point he uses that is very interesting, because usually it's not phrased like this in logical texts of philosophy, is that contingent being is infinite. There's an infinity of things in existence, right? So then how can we then posit a serialization of first and last in relation to God, since that is the case, right? So Ibn Arabi says no. By virtue of the fact that God is beyond any kind of serialization, he is also the last. And this is also drawing attention to a very subtle point. And this subtle point is that God is not an entity, right? It is not being, it is not mawjud, it is wujud itself, right? The mawjud is is that which is the container for the wujud itself. And since, like I mentioned in those points at the beginning of the session, that since we cannot talk about God in the terms of the kind of anthropomorphic terms that exoteric people usually understand, where first and last are talking about numerical sequence, God has to be beyond that. So therefore, God, as that which inheres in every single effect, participates in all firstness and all lastness of everything, while simultaneously being beyond all serializations in sequence, right? And that example, like I said, that he draws from of the infinity of contingent existence, of the infinity of the mawjudat, which is another thing that drives a lot of his detractors crazy, because Ibn Arabi is saying that in existence there are indefinite and infinite existences. Yes, he's saying this. But by saying this, he's also then putting the Godhead, al-Haq, even beyond this, right? So once we grasp that, then our understanding of the nature of God becomes very subtle. And this is why, even though sometimes, the Hossevi philosophers like, Hajj Mullah Ali Sabzavari or even Mullah Sadra may articulate certain positions in a way that might be a little bit problematic to the understanding of a common believer, right? But when, for example, Mullah Sadra at the very beginning of Hikmat al-Arshiyah says, Basit al-Haqiqa kull ashya, that the simplicity of existence is all things, but not any one of them, right? When he says that, this logical axiom of the very beginning of his text is a very important and central thing, because what it is doing is that then it places God outside of the understanding of what we even know of the notion of wujud itself. And this is why they use terminology such as wujud al-mutlaq. I mean, I'm a fan of the Shaykhi writings, especially Sheikh Ahmed Ahsayi. Sheikh Ahmed Ahsayi had a real problem with Ibn Arabi on a litany of issues. But even still, Sheikh Ahmed Ahsayi himself, and including in his epitome, philosophical epitome, the Fawaid al-Hikmiyah, cannot but admit to this proposition on a certain level, although he articulates it a little bit differently than Mullah Sadra does. But even he cannot escape this. The only thing that he says that qualifies is that Allah subhanahu, or the reality, the ultimate reality, is beyond wujud itself. This is fine. Ibn Arabi would have no problem with even accepting that proposition. Because when he's talking about wujud in his itlaqi sense, in his absolute case, he is not talking about wujud as we understand the category in the Aristotelian sense of being qua being. And this is a mistake that some of Ibn Arabi's commentators of his Fusus, Jandi, also Onyawi and Qaisari, make, is that they try to bring back the arsenal of Aristotelian ontology into the explanation of being. Whereas with Ibn Arabi himself, this is not the case. He would have a problem with articulating Aristotle's dictum of being qua being as a definition of being. Because what does that even mean? Being as being, right? In an absolute sense, right? He would agree with it insofar as the relation of the absolute being to the mawjudat are concerned, right? With the issue about the cause inherent in its effect. But he would have a very terrible time accepting this as a complete explanatory axiom about the nature of being itself. That answers your question.
Okay, but a little further, because the philosopher, or some of them, they are saying that the only existence which can be infinite, it is the existence in potentiality, but the existence which is in actuality, it is always finite. So how it relates to the saying of Sheikh Muhyiddin, because the contingent existence, it is also existence is potentiality, not in actuality. In actuality, I mean, the mawjudat, they are in actuality, but they are infinite. How the understanding of philosophers relates to Sheikh Muhyiddin?
Very good question.
Just one example. So they are saying, let's get the number. They are infinite, the numbers. Starting from 1, you are going to infinity, but this is existence in potentiality.
Yes.
But what is actual can be only a finite.
Good. Well, Parapathic philosophy says that the necessary being, wajib al-wujud, is God. Everything else either falls within the category of imkaniya, possible existence, or mumtani, impossible existence. Ibn Arabi is saying maybe all imkanat, and including the wujud al-mumtani, which is the adamiyya, the non-existent, in relation to God, are wajib for a very simple reason, because they are inherent as potentialities in the mind of God. So from that perspective, when they actualize, and this is what we just read, they are necessary beings because of that ain athabit that exists in the mind of God knowing all things in their root, as it were, before they even existentiate as imkanat, as so many possibles in the world of contingency. And for a regular Avicennan or Aristotelian, this is crazy. How can you say that because they come into existence and then they pass out of existence? What Ibn Arabi is saying is, yes, from your perspective, when you're seeing these things in time come into existence and pass out of existence, they're imkan. But from the point of view of the eternal, they're necessary because they're in God's mind for all in eternity in illo tempore.
Thank you very much.
They're very
So
welcome.
I just didn't make the connection that yes, in the mind of God they're infinite, and when you take the existent things in relation with God, they are also became necessary existence.
Yeah. And
Okay.
this is the, I mean, you could see why, normal logicians and normal Aristotelian philosophers would be pulling their hair out, because what Ibn Arabi is doing is just, overturning their certainties about causality completely on its head, but still, from even that point of view, this is still not pantheism. This is not monism, because there's no substance here. These are, one of the terms that you'd find in Islamic philosophy is amr etibari, these contingent, specifications, if you were, the amr etibari. From one aspect, these things, these intelligibles and the instantiations and their existentiation in the world are amr etibari from one perspective, but from another perspective, they are not. Because if you say they are not necessary, then what you're doing is then cutting off God's knowledge from their existence. And this then creates a very serious problem, a musalsal, an infinite regress argument in logic that at least the Peripatetics until probably at Nasir ad-Din Tusi were not able to adequately resolve. But with Ibn Arabi, this issue is perfectly resolved, So it's all this is why I'm saying that the standpoint epistemology is such a central. It's like you're in a sphere looking at the same thing from various vantage points of the sphere, and how the light may refract within, if you're inside a sphere, refract from one angle, it takes one shape, then it takes another shape, etc. within a sphere. This is how Ibn Arabi is thinking about these issues, so that there's no contradiction. There's a paradox, yes, but there's no contradiction in what he's saying. It's just a matter of the perspective. They are possible only in terms of their material existence, and they're coming into being and passing out, right? But they are necessary by virtue of being existent in the mind of God. But in the next chapter, in the chapter of Seth, we'll begin to read certain statements that he makes that then even, unpack this and just basically seem to contradict this, but they're not. They're now looking at this issue from a radically different perspective.
And last question, how you would explain the poetry which is towards the end, that everything it is fakir,
All is
and
dependent. This is the
الكل
goal.
مفتكر.
Yeah. All is dependent upon another. It's saying everything is dependent. Every mawjud, every shay, everything that we see in existence is dependent. Everything. Nothing is independent. And he says this is the pure truth. We speak it out plainly. If we mention one wahid, self-sufficient, independent qani, you will know who I'm referring. meaning God.
So that is my question. Who is the one who is self-sufficient?
God.
Sheikh.
God.
Okay, but I think maybe here there is a subtle.
Or you could see that in Son and Comment. I mean, it's again, it's in relation to what we're understanding, right? And he says that he veils it a little bit in what he just said above. You will know to whom I refer. But it depends on your standpoint. You could say the insan and comment, but you could also say al-haq. It's the same thing that you're saying. Everything is dependent. Everything, every mawjud. Kullu shay halik ila wajhuhu. La ilaha illahu kullu shayin halik ila wajhuhu. There's no God but it. All things perish but its face. Right?
Can we also interpret in the following manner that he is also referring to God, but from different aspects?
Yes.
Meaning that if we take God as creator, who created thing, then the creator and the created, they're mutually dependent.
Exactly.
In the same, there is not possible to exist creator without creation.
Absolutely. He says this. Yeah.
But the one which is independent, it is, I don't know how exactly to formulate it, but the Kanzul Makhfi, that the level of ahadiyya, that it is the wujud mutlaq, and that's all.
Yeah. But the wujud mutlaq also then inheres in the wujudat itlaq, and it's the ta'ayyunat, the essentializations that occur. But the way to conceive, and this is because of the paradoxical argumentation language he's using, it's very easy to get lost. So what I would suggest is that if you think about a room of convex and concave mirrors, right? A spherical room, you have concave, convex mirror everywhere. And you look at a particular image as refracted from one frame of the mirror to another all around the room. What happens? Right? This is what is going on. And if in the emanationism of Ibn Arabi in particular, less so with Suhrawardi, but with Ibn Arabi definitely, this is what we're dealing with. Right? And this is why I think it's so centrally important, although he doesn't really bring it up more often, at least in the Fusus al-Hikam, where he uses the analogy of the mirror is such an important thing. And then he simultaneously said that this mirror is the mahal. It's the locus, but at the same time, the locus is also the final product, you know, of that which is being reflected into it. So again, think of the room of convex, concave mirrors and an image that is being refracted through all the various lenses of the mirrors in this room, right? I actually found one of these places in Germany, in Berlin. It was a kids park, and went and sat in there for about an hour one time, just contemplating some of the things in his book, and it clicked immediately what he's talking about.
Thank you, Sidi. That's were my questions.
Anybody else?
I have a question if nobody else does.
Go for it.
The statement, could you expand on the statement, make your outer transient selves a protection for your Lord and your inner essential reality, and make your inner reality, which is your Lord, a protection for your outer selves?
Yeah.
Because in Abraham, basically what he says is that the first part of that statement is, you know, don't blame God for your own sins. And the second part is that good does not come from you, it comes from God, and that you can't take responsibility for it. I just wanted to get your opinion, whether you agree with that or not.
I could write a whole book just on this alone. This is such a deep, deep statement. Basically, making one's outer aspect a guard thing or a protection for God, and then the inner, making God the protection for the outer, is just a very interesting and practical way of saying, like I said, you know, he who knows himself knows his Lord, right? Except the way that Ibn Arabi is phrasing it here is more as a kind of a practical advice. if you sit down and think about it, making your outward form a protection for God, on one level, it could mean, when you follow or adhere to let's say, a particular religious manifestation, whatever that is, and you're meticulous, you're not a hypocrite, you're not you are conforming, you're praying, however many times a day, you fast, etc. Why is that important? Is because then this cultivates that inner reality of yourself, which is your Lord, right? So through the outward, right? Through the outward, the inner is known, and through the inner, the outward is protected. So there's a dynamic, and this dynamic then projects the understanding of what it means to know yourself in order to know your Lord. And on the one hand, even though the way that is expressed, there's a beginning and end trajectory, the question always arises, then what comes first, the inner or the outer? Because Ibn Arabi, like myself, is very much an advocate of the primacy of the batin over the zahir. The batin is what generates the zahir, right? The inner world is what brings the outer world into being, rather than the other way around. But as fleshy, material creatures who are, who have fallen away from their fitrah, the way that we come back to God, as it were, is through our inner world, right? And how does that even begin? Well, for someone of Ibn Arabi's time, or even someone of our own time, the way that Shams of Tabriz expresses this in the Maghalat al-Shams is the muta'ba'at, the conformity with the Sunnah. But what he means by that is not what the four schools of law are talking about. So that means that you're walking in the footsteps of Muhammad himself, right? As archetypally, you can apply that as much as possible. And then this becomes the protection for your spiritual quest that you realize from within your own being, such that you're now, there are two protections happening. The inner protects the outer, and the outer protects the inner reality, right? From whatever is going on out there with other people in the world and all its insanity, etc. Because one thing that this particular passage, in the way that Ibn Arabi expresses it, which I find very interesting, is that while he's talking, elsewhere, just before it and after it, about the nature of qana'ah of God, the independence of God, or the richness of God, with this dynamic that he's suggesting in this particular paragraph, let the outer be the protection of the inner, and the inner is your Lord, who then protects the outer. He's basically offering what the meaning of being qani, independent, really means for the Sadiq, and then how to apply this in your own life, to then reflect that qana'at of the All High itself, because this is part of the process of understanding a lot of these things. You cannot understand the independence of the All High without establishing your own inner and outer independence from the world of multiplicity around you. If you are, for example, being influenced by your peers or your culture, or your, the popular culture, or even your, subculture, whatever, then you're not independent. So there is a non-conformism, in a sense, to that pattern of being qani, and understanding the nature of this name of being qani in relation to God, where we are seeking to know, and who wants to know itself through us, right? So this is how I've taken it. But overall, that particular paragraph is very much a gloss, a practical gloss on the meaning of the hadith, man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah, whosoever knows himself knows his Lord.
Thank you so much for that answer, because I know Ibn Arabi, he has some reputation in certain circles as being like antinomian, but I find that he kind of this was covered in the introduction as well, but he kind of deviates from any sort of he kind of fills every box, the Sunni box, the Shia box, everything. He's very, very interesting.
Very much so. I mean, one thing I was reading last night in the Futuhat, I was looking at some of the later chapters, because this discussion came up on the theurgy list, about whether you cross your hands or leave your hands on your sides for the salat. And even Arabic, unlike the Hanafis and the Malikis, very much like Shia and also like the Shafi'i school, advises that the hands be put on the sides for the salat because it represents the aleph of ahadiyah, so that the qiyam itself represents aleph. And this is why we should put our hands on our sides rather than fold them up, like the Malikis or the Hanafis say you should do, or the followers of Ibn Taymiyyah right now are claiming that all Muslims should do. And this was very profound. I'd read this many years ago, and then I read it again last night as to the justification that Ibn Arabi gives for this practice, which usually is associated with either the Shia or the Shafi'i school, of fiqh.
Thank you so much. I think that covers everything. But of course, if you wanted to expand on that further as we go along, I'd be more than happy to hear it.
Sure. Well, as we go along, these points will come up again and again. So next week we will begin the first half of the chapter on Seth. So begin to read that in the 3 translations, and anything that comes up, let me know as you're reading. This is a very interesting chapter. It kind of ends on a very weird sort of note, which I think we'll cover as well in that once this chapter comes up. But otherwise, there are some amazing metaphysical points that he makes throughout this chapter that kind of also not both unpack what we have just been talking about in the last 2 sessions, but also then go beyond them at the same time. Please keep in mind this dialogic, this dualitude, this very sort of non-dualist dialectic that I'm talking about, because it will help you to understand the argument much better. Whereas if you're trying to partition the arguments in a very conventional way, this, as opposed to this, you will get lost with them in Arabic. So everything that he says, take it as kind of an augmentation of the last point he made, even though if there are differences, it's almost an expansion of the points that he's making rather than pitting a strict dialectic of X and Y or plus and minus. So, and with that, I guess, we'll leave it here.
Just one practical
ahead,
question. Can we, the questions which we have through our reading to our next meaning, can we freely write our question in the Islamic theurgy list, or we should send the question?
You mean
the Islamic theurgy and the white
on the
your
Facebook
groups,
list?
Sheikh? Can we or it should be personal, or no problem directly into the group?
As of 2 days ago, we got 10,000 people on that list, and not even a fraction of the people who initially said that they wanted to do a course signed up for this course. So the question is, will they be even interested in anything that we're talking about? Sure. The one thing that will jump out at you from the very first paragraph of the chapter of Seth is, for example, we could leave it for next week, but the first thing that he addresses is how the divine gifts and favors manifest, right? So this is a very important question in theurgy, because people are wondering all the time, I do these operations or I make these dua and I do this and that and follow the astrology and nothing happens, what's going on? Either magic is nonsense or I don't know, or God doesn't like me, all this kind of stuff. So from the very first paragraph of the chapter of Seth, Ibn Arabi begins to address this dynamic. Why is it working? Why is it not working? Although a lot of the things that he says are very subtle, and he's not directly addressing the question of theurgy and magic directly, but yet the arguments that he's putting have implications for exactly this. So if you make your reading and you find a couple of nuggets and you have a bit of an intuition about certain things, by all means post it on the list, to get some discussion going. Because to tell you the truth, I am sick and tired of all the questions about jinn and possessions and people wanting to make their material life better by invoking a mawakil, etc. We need some real discussion. This is about theurgy, and as far as I'm concerned, Ibn Arabi is the supreme theurgist. You know, that doesn't get any. There's nowhere else to go beyond him. So absolutely, if you in your reading, you get a few things, whichever of the three translations, throw it on the list, make a post. Sure, why not? Anybody else? Okay, then, we'll leave it here and until the same time next week. Ya Allah.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.